so much.
Thank you for the introduction. Well, I'm very excited for this panel because circular economy is quite important to reach our targets for our sustainable development goals. And for that, I'm not alone here. I have two wonderful experts, which I would like to invite now on stage. Stefanie Roithmayr and Sarah Böhring. Take a seat wherever you feel comfortable, and I will make a brief introduction of both of you. Because you are working in very interesting fields, in sustainable building and also in impact investment. So Stefanie, you have a quite good background and also a master's degree in natural resource management, and you're working for the City of Vienna. So we can now ask all our questions in regards to city development, where I'm quite excited about. And you are also part of the executive group for construction and technology. So also that is driving a lot of change in Vienna. The DoTank Circular City Vienna 2020 and 2030, correct? Okay, so thanks that you are coming here and taking your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here today.
And our second expert, Sarah. So she's an investment associate at Yabeo, and she's specializing in impact investment, as I told you, and also in resource scarcity, circular economy, and the transition into circular economy, and as well education. And so we can ask her all those questions when it comes to the impact investments, what investors are looking for example, especially for your startups, quite interesting. And you have also experience with growth strategies, with M&A processes. And so, yeah, with your experience as a strategy consultant, there is even more we can dive deeper in. So I will take now a seat.
Thank you so much.
So there are a lot of questions which would be quite interesting. But first of all, maybe we take a brief look into the circular economy realm. And so are there some things you would like to point out, like where we are currently at in Austria or also in Europe, if there are some interesting benchmarks, or just to give a brief frame about how we are currently in our development?
Okay. Yeah, so as you already mentioned, I'm especially focused on the building sector, but in general, Austria has released the circularity strategy last year. So it has been implemented by the Federal Ministry of Climate and Technology and Innovation. And Austria also was one of the first nations to have the so-called circularity gap report, so where it points out how much is missing to be a circular economy. So, and those are two things which are highly important when we try to tackle to change the linear system to a circular one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from my point of view, like you mentioned, I used to be a strategy consultant. I worked for a lot of the large PE houses, and actually, fun fact, back then I promised I'd never be an investor, which of course changed around a year ago. And back then I noticed a lot of PEs kind of switching already from doing just going into companies, kind of taking out costs and switching them. And one of the very interesting projects I was part of was doing a strategy for a circular economy player in the UK. And this was the first time I really noticed also large private equity houses focusing on that. And they were not a sustainability focused one, but they were generalist private equity. And now as an investor, like many startups come from the energy field, but I would say the last half year I've seen a lot of startups also from the circular economy space. And I think this is very reflective of where we're moving. We're noticing that resource scarcity is one of our largest issues. It's not just the energy transition, it's also using the resources we have and using them effectively. Yeah, from a consulting perspective as well as an investor perspective, this is really changing, and startups are coming up in those fields.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe we dive first deeper into Vienna, since we are here in this capital city today. So we have actually quite interesting numbers from the city of Vienna, like 127,000 tons of waste have been saved within 20 years with the program of Ökobusiness. So this is quite impressive because it's like 300 times like the big wheel of Vienna, the Ferris wheel. Almost unbelievable. So there are some programs supporting this change. And so, yeah, maybe you can dive deeper, Stefanie, what are current things you are working on for the city of Vienna to maximize it, because these strategies can be obviously interesting also globally.
Yeah, so I just want to click on what you said before, the scarcity of materials. So not only so many tons of wastes are saved, also it's a matter of saving raw materials. And I just picked up the number, that's why I'm sitting here with my sheet, because I'm really bad with remembering numbers. There was a figure by the European Commission that by 2030 the raw material need will shrink by 17 to 24%. So that's really a big number, and it's also a big cost-saving thing for industries. So first, when everybody thinks about circular economy, they say like, yeah, but it will cost more because we have to adapt all our production and service structures. But then in the end, it will be a significantly reduction of costs due to the shrinking of raw material needs.
I also think this is the way that we will transition. I see this more and more. A few years back, and I get this question a lot, do you think impact investing is philanthropy? And I do not believe that this is the case. I do believe startups are becoming more successful because they're using resources, they're reusing them, and with that they're saving money. And a lot of companies, they will not change because they believe in the good cause. They will change because they're seeing the raw materials are getting more and more expensive, and recycling, using recycled materials, this is the way we are able to actually save money and make a margin on our bottom line. And this is also where I see companies adapting in those kind of more sustainable techniques. So it doesn't cost them money, it actually saves them money.
Yeah, and also talking about how to maximize the positive effect. So we can see that it's a global phenomenon, that circular business model popping up in different sectors and in different regions. So I would say that just the big buzzword collaboration is a hint for companies and persons. And I think to measure the success of the transition to a circular economy, we will have to see how fast we can learn from each other to implement the new strategies and the new measurements to transition to a circular economy.
Yeah, I agree.
So when we talk about saving costs, would you say, Sarah, that saving costs is a main objective for investors when they're seeking for startups, like when they're presenting their solution, their sustainable solution?
Yes, and I wish the answer would be no, and we're investing because technology is so great. But what you have to think is we also have to create a return for our investors, and we have a certain time field. We're lucky we're an evergreen fund, so we have a bit more of a longer time span. But you need to create value, and how will you create value? It's because companies are having customers. It's not just us investors, right? We're just enabling tool, but they need to kind of convince customers. And I was looking at this interesting startup. They're using recycled material for road construction, and amazing technology saves a lot of CO2. But my question to them was like, how do you convince your customers? What is your pitch to them? And of course, those customers will be happy to say, oh, look, we saved CO2. And hopefully in a few years, this will be a main factor in cities saying, we choose you, we choose to work with this material because it saves CO2. But currently it's price. You compete on price with other materials. And there you need to be at least equally, have an equal price, or you need to be cheaper, because that's your way in. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully in a few years, our sourcing criteria for companies have changed, and they will really weigh CO2 higher than other things. But currently it's still cost, and startups have to compete on cost.
Mm-hmm. Stefanie, How do you see this connected with the development strategies that you are working on with the cities? Because you are also seeking for innovation to drive this change. So has the startup scene or also the kind of ideas which are presented, what are you seeking there, like in terms of the startups and in the innovations?
So in Vienna, I think we have a quite good structure of public services which helps to develop the startups. So I'm just making advertisement for Vienna Business Agency here. And I think there is a good connection between the startups and more developed companies to learn from each other and to work together. And from the city perspective, I have to admit that it's sometimes a bit tricky. So you meet a startup with a great idea, but then you can not just say from a city level like, hey, I buy that now, because there's, of course, and for good reason, some processes you have to go through to prove and to take a look at different options. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned the collaboration between established companies and startups as well. So that's something that maybe Sarah can tell us more. Yeah, so how can those two sectors maybe collaborate even more? Or what can we learn from the startups actually? Because mid-sized companies do a big part in the transition, obviously, but sometimes they lack a bit of this agile movement and innovation. So what can they learn from each other actually?
So I think both need each other, but what we've seen in the past, for example, past corporate venture builders haven't been very successful because they kind of try to force a startup into a corporate structure. Mm-hmm. While a lot of startups, they're really good in the beginning, they have an amazing idea, they scale it up, but then they kind of miss this transition to growing up and kind of switching from startup mode to scale-up mode to established mode. And I think the collaboration, and we see this more and more, is companies very early on working with technical startups and supporting them with letters of intent, supporting them with pilots so that they can build up credibility, but kind of let them do their own thing, let them develop outside of the corporate structure, but kind of help them in integrating into their ecosystem, help them with first pilots, help them with credibility. And then once they've established that, once those pilots have become successful, either buying them or becoming a full-term customer of them. And I think what a lot of startups are missing in the beginning, especially Germany, where I'm located, I think DACH is very similar. We still have a lot of conservative industries, and you need the credibility, you need those companies saying, look, we trust this solution. You need the first few large customers, and the way they kind of maneuver in the industry and they make connections, I think it's sometimes a bit foreign to startups, the long cycles. So I think what startups can learn and can partner with corporates is really understanding those industrial decision makers who will become your customers one day. Mm-hmm. And corporates need to give the startups the freedom to move in the way they want to move. And if they invest early on, not push them into one strategic direction because it will fit them. Mm-hmm. And for example, when we look into investing or co-investing with a strategic investor, we are also very clear on we need to limit the influence they have in an early stage. We need to limit how much they can push the company in a certain direction so they don't lose their ability to be innovative and move as a startup.
That totally makes sense, yes. You brought it to the point. So, yeah, when you are working with those startups, or let's say you saw already a lot of good ideas, so how would you personally identify this is a promising idea or this is something I would have a closer look at? Do you have there some insights?
Well, I think after some time you kind of develop it's not just your personal view, right? It's also the fund you're working in. What is your fund structure? What is your fund portfolio strategy? And you develop a good feeling of who could be an interesting founder who we would get along with. I think this is very important. You need people. I'm not a big fan of those startups being founded by, and I'm an ex-consultant myself, by 5 ex-McKinsey guys. Because so who brings the technical expertise? Like, having some of them in there, it's amazing because they're usually very driven. But you know, the team, is the team a team I think we can trust and they can develop something? Do they have this technical knowledge and at the same time the commercial savviness? Because this sometimes is missing in impact startups. They're very focused on the impact, but are kind of missing out on this commercial side. So looking at the team, and then again, as an impact investor, I need to first establish that this is really an impact which is created. This is my first look. Is this something which creates additional impact? And if this is done, what is the market? What are the customers? What is your proposition towards the customer? And as I mentioned, I'm not a big fan of saying it's just something more sustainable. It needs to have another selling point, for example, reducing cost or making the access to raw material easier, which currently we have a lot of shortage. So putting this all together, having an impactful solution that actually saves money or enables access to something and creates a company a competitive advantage, and a team where I believe they will be able to execute. Those are the three things I'm looking at.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, let's come back to Vienna for a second. This is something that maybe not everybody's aware of. Vienna is planning to become zero waste by 2040. So reducing waste, increase reuse and recycling, and minimizing landfill. So when we think about those strategies that Vienna is planning to implement, is this something, Stefanie, that can be replicated also in other cities? Or are there maybe some tips so that we can speak from the experience of Vienna to communicate this globally?
Yeah, as you already mentioned, one of the goals Vienna is focusing on, also the overall goal of Vienna is to become climate neutral by 2040, which is even, I would say, a bigger ambition. And the special thing is that this goal is also anchored in the Vienna's city government. So it's like a goal everyone tries to work on and is working on in the public sector. And Vienna has already implemented a smart city strategy in 2014, which was also very early compared to other European cities. And this strategy was recently revised in 2022. It's now called Smart Climate City Strategy. So they brought in more the focus of the climate and also added a huge part of circular economy. And the strategies are on one hand, the strategic paper, but also include a lot of measures how to actually get there. So we have in Vienna the Klimafahrplan, which is basically the climate roadmap for the city of Vienna, which contains 100 measures to undertake to reach all our goals. And I wouldn't say that these strategic papers are specifically tailored to Vienna, so it's a thing other cities can replicate. And we as a city are also in constant exchange with other cities, so we try to learn from each other and help each other on different topics.
That's amazing. That's how it should be, because everybody's on a different level when it comes to sustainability. And exchanging the strategies will fast track the whole process. So when you're thinking about those strategies and especially innovation, is there something you observed? Which kind of innovations would you love to tie in more to enhance the process?
Yeah, I come back again to the word collaboration because I think we just have to break up the way we have been working with each other and together within the last years, since circular economy is just a holistic system which tackles a lot of different industries and also stakeholders who might have not been connected or working with each other beforehand. So that is one of the innovation part. And another one which I strongly link to circular economy is digitalization. I'm just mentioning, for example, digital ecosystems for creating platforms for selling secondary materials again. So there are a lot of digital solutions and tools who might be very useful and necessary for implementing circular economy.
Yeah, this actually reminds me on a startup we had here at Tech2Impact called BioWaste, an app for recycling, actually. So systems like that would be welcome at the City of Vienna, because I mean, many startups focus on data-based ideas. So everything that's reusing waste or fostering recycling, that's something that you would actually take a deeper look at.
Yes, so there are also working groups in Vienna already working with some startups or companies, and also working on, for example, a digital twin for the city. So it's not only on waste side, but also from the building sector.
Thank you. So coming back to the startups, you told me recently that you would wish that more circular economy startups are getting funded. So maybe you have also experience, Sarah, with the scaling of those startups. Like, what have you observed? What are the main bottlenecks that they are not making the investment round, or that they are not scaling?
I think you have to differentiate there a bit between those purely data-driven models. For example, some startups that take stock of the CO2 in a building or the materials used, and then once the building is scaled back, they can kind of return it to the manufacturer. Those usually save money, so they have an easier way because they can go straight to the customer and offer them something which would save them money, and usually also takes care of some kind of reporting. And this is the first part. Actually, on the positive side, there's a lot of regulation on reporting which has to be done now, and startups that kind of cater to that and save time and effectively also money on this whole reporting side. They have a more or less easy way now. But we see on the other side, and I think you probably also see that when it comes to actually materials and building and going into that, the first pilots are usually quite easy. But then to be rolled out, you need to fit into certain regulation. And for example, Germany, I think for road construction, the last revival or the revision of this code was 2010. So some companies that would like to do house construction or road construction more sustainable, they do not, by definition, fall into this regulation, so they cannot be rolled out large scale. I think this is something, especially in DACH, which we have, there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of bureaucracy, and everything is changing very slowly. And as an investor, you cannot judge when will this happen. Will this happen in 2 years? Will this happen in 10 years? And will the startup make it until then? And it's a sad truth that with so much uncertainty, a lot of investors don't invest. So to come back to your question, what would need to happen is we would need faster adaptation of the regulatory base in order to give investors confidence that they have a chance to develop and they have a chance to really scale.
When we speak about faster, what would be a good time frame so that...
Not 15 years.
Not 15 years, yeah. A few years.
Yeah, probably, but I'm not sure if you can put a time on it. But having knowing how the processes work, so once you start it, it can be implemented in X time. But it's also very difficult and very, bureaucratical construct, right? So you have something on a local level, then you have something again on a federal level, then you have something on a European level, and it is a quite difficult process. And if I knew how to change it, I'd probably not be an investor but a politician. But I do hope that we get faster at it.
Stefanie?
Yeah, I was just thinking about I'm working in the building sector, so Austria has 9 different federal regions. We have 8 different building regulations. But as you mentioned, I'm also part of this DoTank Circular City, where we try to transition from a linear economy to a circular economy in the building sector. And there, one of my colleagues is specially dedicated to change the regulation in the way to include circularity. So the next building regulation will already be with a circular economy focus.
Perfect, and you're faster than I think most places in my country.
Looking forward for that. So coming back to startups and investors, is there something how investors and startups can work better together? Oh, yeah, we actually run out of time. So maybe we save this for the networking because this is quite interesting. Your point of view is very special here also for all the startups. Yeah, this was actually also my last point with the collaboration of, how can we make the stands happen between the regulatories, but also innovation, because actually we all want the same, but obviously it's hard to, from a city perspective or a country perspective, to be as fast as they would like to be. So thank you both for being here and giving your unique perspective. It was a pleasure. And have a nice day.